Let's talk some BYU football recruiting. Let's get to two commitments from this past week. And we'll start off with Antonio Johnson, who committed on Saturday. Now, Antonio Johnson is from Arlington Heights High School down in the Fort Worth area of Texas. And the one thing I know based on what I watch about Antonio Johnson is he is what I called a Jay Hill special. And you're probably like, what's a Jay Hill special, Jay? What are you talking about here? The thing about Antonio Johnson, if you look at his offer list, it's not extensive. It's not like bloated with a bunch of Power 5 teams like some of the other commitments BYU has taken in this 2026 cycle. But what it is it's a kid, speaking of Antonio Johnson, who is a long, rangy athlete, listed at 6'4", 190 pounds. He's got the length you would think would be a premier for maybe a corner, but it looks like he's probably going to play safety for the BYU defense, and that's where Jay Hill absolutely plays a role because he's the safeties coach along with his defensive coordinator title. But if you look at his recruiting recently, he's brought in guys like Matthias Leach, Falatau Satuala, Tommy Prasis. Every single one of those guys stands 6'2" or taller. Gone are the days of BYU going with compact 6 foot, 220-pound safeties. 220 pounds probably over exaggeration, but you get what I'm talking about. They want long, rangy athletes who are able to cover the ground necessary in the single high defense that BYU plays, because guys like Tanner Wall right now, they're the last line of defense. If something breaks down in front of them, they have to clean it up. But also the other safety, speaking of the strong safety in this defense, they have to be able to play the run adequately, but also cover guys like tight ends. And having length like a guy like Antonio Johnson has here at 6'4", you can't teach it. And that's why I think Jay Hill absolutely craves adding guys like this. You look, like I said, you look at his offer list, it's a bunch of G5 and FCS offers, but the one thing that I can look at and say about Antonio Johnson is that he is going to come in and be trained up very, very clearly in this BYU defense, and Jay Hill will absolutely impart his wisdom upon him. But at the same time, he's not being asked to come in immediately and play right away. He's a 3-star talent, so he's not necessarily the headliner of this 2026 class. But Texas State, UTEP, Austin Peay are some of the offers he's had. Those are like offers you would think, okay, this is a guy that BYU recruited back in the day when it came to the independent era. Yeah, they would have, and they would have been lucky to have him. But I think Jay Hill sees one of those diamonds in the rough in this kid. And I think that he expects that when Johnson shows up on campus here, working with himself and obviously kind of getting engrossed in the weight room and doing what BYU does with their athletes, that in time, he's going to emerge on the other side as a really, really high-level athlete and a future cornerstone potentially of BYU's defense. I really do think this is one of those talents that, yeah, while the offer list may not look spectacular and you're probably got questions about why is BYU recruiting this guy, well, look at it from the perspective of Jay Hill. He probably latched on to Antonio Johnson and was, okay, I found a guy who kind of floated under the radar, and we're going to get him here to Provo, and we're going to get him committed, and we're going to get him signed, and he's going to be a big part of the future of this defense. And that's exactly what it looks like here. That's what I love about guys like this, because Jay Hill, if there's one thing Jay Hill has earned in his relatively short time as BYU's defensive coordinator, is he is absolutely elite at identifying talent and then ultimately transforming it and letting it become a key part of his defense. And you can go back to his days at Weber State and look at the guys he brought to Ogden, trained up, and unleashed on the Big Sky. And there are just dozens upon dozens of them that were maybe a 0-star or a 2-star, or who knows what star they were when they showed up in Ogden. And over time at Weber State, they become the absolute dominant defensive players in Jay Hill's defense. He's done the same thing at BYU. So if Antonio Johnson is a guy that Jay Hill wants, take him. I'm all in on that. I will trust that Jay Hill, his evaluation process, what he looks for, markers that he wants in terms of the players he likes. This kid, speaking of Antonio Johnson, checks every box, it sure appears. And once again, if it's Jay Hill wanting a guy, I got no reason to argue with it, because his track record suggests that he sees something in this kid, and given the adequate time, preparation, and obviously Antonio Johnson buying in to what BYU is doing, I think that this is going to be a really, really nice pairing for BYU to have in their defensive secondary. I think this year you can probably pencil in a guy like Tanner Wall as starting free safety. You also probably have Raider Demooney penciled in as your starting strong safety. But then you also have Tommy Prasis probably backing up Tanner Wall, who I just talked about at 6'2", and then Falatau Satuala probably backing up Raider Demooney at that strong safety spot. And those are all homegrown talents that BYU wants to have and obviously unleash. And then Antonio Johnson coming in the 2026 class. Well, Tanner Wall's going to exit. I think Raider Dooney's got another year beyond that. Over time, the turnover at the safety room is going to give him an opportunity after maybe a redshirt year and time training in this defense to really emerge as maybe a sophomore and then be a force for this BYU defense. It sets up a really, really nice succession plan for Jay Hill at defense. And I will also add this. BYU wants to make Texas a base area of operations for them recruiting-wise, especially the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And getting a kid out of Fort Worth and Arlington Heights High School goes right in line with that. So I think this is a really, really nice pickup for the BYU defense. It checks a box of continuing BYU success in mining the Lone Star State for talent. BYU for years obviously used Hawaii and California to great effect, and they will continue to do so. But now that they're in the Big 12 and they're playing the likes of a Houston, of a Texas Tech, you have to go into the Lone Star State and get some of that talent out of that state because, simply put, Texas is way too big for all the Texas schools even to keep all the talent in state. It's absolutely insane to think of how much talent comes out of there. But BYU, the more they can do to scoop that talent up and bring it to Provo, I'm all for it. And I think that Jay Hill has absolutely crushed it in terms of going out and finding a high-level talent like an Antonio Johnson, who is very much flown under the radar. And I think over time will emerge as a really, really fun player to watch because you cannot teach his 6'4", 190 and the speed he possesses. You watch that on film, you can't teach any of that. And obviously with the college weight room, working in BYU with their sports science staff, you figure this kid probably emerges maybe 6'4", 210 pounds, prototypical type safety. Hey, I'm here for it. And I'm looking forward to seeing him in a Cougar uniform. All right, coming up here in just a moment. The second guy who was committed from visits this past weekend is Parker Ord. Now, Antonio Johnson doesn't have necessarily a really unique connection to BYU. Parker Ord, on the other hand, he has got, simply put, all the connections to BYU. You probably know the last name, but is this kid got the same type of skill as maybe his uncles had? We'll talk about who Parker Ord is next. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Another plug for you guys to join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports. Just $5 a month to be a part of the group. But the kicker is you get a 2-week free trial, 14 days of unfettered access. And the best part is the updates come to your phone in the form of a text message. You don't have to log on to a website or go to a message board to get the inside intel that you crave. It comes to your phone and doesn't get much better than that. So sign up today. Link is in the show notes below, and hope that many more of you will continue to join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, let's talk about another commitment from the BYU football program this past weekend. That is Parker Ord. Now, that last name sounds familiar. It should. Now, Andrew Ord was a player for BYU from the late 90s to the early 2000s. I think Andrew finished up it was the Gary Croton era. I'm fairly certain. I think it was like 01 or 02 when he finished up. And as far as I am aware, Parker Ord is the nephew of Andrew Ord, but the Ord family has been in and around BYU football forever. And Parker Ord has everything that BYU wants in their offensive skill players. Now, he plays kind of a big hybrid wide receiver role for his high school down there in Texas. We talked about Antonio Johnson being a Texas product. Well, another one, speaking of Parker Ord, he is a guy that BYU absolutely looked at, evaluated, and I think there maybe was some question. He plays for Panther Creek High School in Frisco, Texas. He's kind of on the other side of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex from where Antonio Johnson is from. But if you look at a guy like Parker Ord, he's 6'4", 210 pounds right now. He has plans to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I think depending on how his body develops while he's out in the mission field, there's two ways it goes for him, in my opinion, at BYU. One, he stays kind of that wiry 6'4", 210 pounds that he is right now coming out of high school, and he ends up playing kind of that big wide receiver role. Think of a Chase Roberts. Think of Taron Houck back in the day. Also, Neil Pau'u. That's another one to think of. Guys who stood 6'3", 6'4", weighed maybe 210 to 220. Even Keanu Hill, who before he moved to tight end, Keanu Hill was 6'4", 210 pounds, 220. And BYU has shown they can have success with those guys. Parker Ord doesn't have elite speed, and that's nothing against him. It's just some guys aren't blessed with that type of speed, but he's very effective in his role. You look at the offense he played in at Panther Creek, and it's a very modern offense. A lot of shotgun formations, a lot of 3 and 4 wide sets where he kind of plays that inside wide receiver role, uses his size to his advantage, but at the same time, understands route concepts and when to get open and where to get open against man, against zone. I watched his highlight reel and I was enthralled with the way he attacked opposing defenses. And you guys are probably going to hop in the YouTube comments. Why are you not showing his highlights? For some reason tonight, StreamYard that I record this on wasn't letting me throw my huddle highlights up on it. I don't know why I have the issue. I've talked with our engineers about it, and hopefully they'll have an answer for me. But the bigger point is, speaking of Parker Ord, is he could stay at that wide receiver role and be maybe the next Chase Roberts type for BYU. Or if he's on the mission, and as most guys do, you can gain some weight and fill out your frame a little bit in the mission field. And yes, that may not be the best weight, but he could come home at 230 and maybe ultimately end up at 240, 250 pounds and be a tight end. Now, BYU's got other tight ends in this recruiting class. Brock Harris, Ty Getchie are also guys who have committed at tight end for BYU. But there's no reason to think that BYU can't get themselves back into the tight end business and do it with these trio they've committed in this 26 class. As I mentioned, Parker, he's got wide receiver skills, so he kind of maybe fits more in the mold of, I don't want to invoke this name because he's an all-time legend, but a Dennis Pitta type. He could be that type of a split out wide tight end. And I'm not saying that Brock Harris or Ty Getchie can't be that because they've got the same type of skill. I think Brock Harris is absolutely incredible and is just he's one of one in my opinion. But Parker Ord, I think it really depends on how his mission goes and if he fills out that frame. If he does, great. He comes in and plays tight end for BYU and you sort the details out later. That's what I love about this. And you can't ever have too many guys of his caliber, it feels like, in this program. He's another 3-star athlete, rated 86 by our friends over at 24/7 Sports. So a upper end of the 3-star rankings. This is not a 81, 82 guy. This is legit 86 and has played a really, really large role at top shelf high school football in the state of Texas. And if he can produce at that level, there's a thought that over time he will develop his frame and ultimately be able to contribute at a high level for the BYU football program as well. I really do think that BYU getting into Texas as they've done here with Antonio Johnson and Parker Ord, it's a great thing for the Cougars to have those inroads made in the state of Texas. Obviously, Ord's got the family connection to BYU, and that helps. But I love the fact that he has got a ways to go in terms of his overall development as a player, but you can already see a bunch of the polish that he had at the high school level. All you got to do is just turn on the film. You're like, okay, yeah, this kid's got the goods. And I love the way he plays. And the other thing I like, he's physical. He didn't shy away. I saw a bunch of him stock blocking out on the perimeter on run plays for his high school. The best part is he engages guys. He goes after them. Some wide receivers will engage with guys, like it's kind of read and react and they'll engage. Parker Ord like attacks dudes. And I can respect that as well. Because if he ends up as a tight end, guess what? Knowing what I know of BYU's tight end room right now is if you can't block, you don't play. And that's a big, big part of what BYU wants from their tight ends. And his ability to already block on the perimeter as a wide receiver and relish that role, at least on his highlight reel from Huddle, the ability to go out, find guys, hunt them down, and make their life miserable. He had a bunch of pancake blocks on some of these corners that, he's bigger than, obviously. But that shows that he relishes that opportunity as much as he does catching touchdowns, getting a big play, and obviously on offense. But you have to also be a team player. And that's what Parker Ord shows in his highlight reel is the ability, as I said, to go downfield, seek out guys he's supposed to block, and finish those blocks. As a former offensive lineman myself, I can respect guys like that because too often it felt like some perimeter guys, or at least what I see on film, is that they'll engage. They engage pretty lightly. They're not necessarily as engrossed in the blocking elements as they should be. But Parker, to his credit, embraces all of it. And that will serve him well at the next level because, as I mentioned, if you look at what BYU's offense requires from its tight ends, they want guys who are complete tight ends. They don't want to have just a pass catcher and blockers. They've had to use those in formations at times in the past just because they didn't have the same type of talent that they feel like they're going to have in future classes, especially in this 26 class with Brock Harris, Ty Getchie, and now Parker Ord. I think all three of them, given adequate time, resources, and obviously mission service, I think for all three, depending on when they go, etc., you can expect that all three of them will be well-rounded and ultimately should emerge as nice pieces for this BYU football program. And the other thing I'll say about tight end talents is, or guys who have frames like this, who are 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and between 220 and 250 pounds, even if it doesn't work out at tight end, there's other positions you can try. Linebacker, defensive end. Like, it's not that you're going to be a tight end forever. If it doesn't work out of that position, they have the type of frame that translates over to other positions on the football field. I'm not saying it's going to happen for Parker Ord that he has to switch positions, but that also is a big reason why you recruit guys of his caliber, because you can find places to put them on the field that will help you win, even if it's not necessarily at tight end, or in the case of Parker, could it still end up at wide receiver? So really, really fine pickup. And yeah, having another Ord in the BYU football program for sickos like me, I'm all for it, because I did love watching some Andrew Ord back in the day in the late 90s and early 2000s. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. As always, thank you for all your support. I am probably going to take a couple of days off this week. I'm looking probably at doing a show tomorrow, taking Wednesday off at least, and maybe taking Friday off. But hey, if the news necessitates it, you guys know me. I love doing this podcast, and we will knock out as many editions of the show as we need to this week, but understand if I miss a day or two coming up later on in the week. But as always, truthfully, thank you for all your support. Thank you for being with us every single day, and thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars a part of your day and being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.